Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to If Deku Went to the Support Course Part 3. Last time on the What If, Zuko and Bakugo had to fight against All Might for the final exams, and they were able to pass. And Class 1A and 1B went to a summer camp, and they were trained by the WWPC, but the camp got attacked on the second day. Bakugo, Shinso, and Tokoyami got captured by the League of Villains. Then all the injured people were taken to the hospital, but the only places Izuku is injured is the head and back. And the body count is around 3 now. So now let's jump back into the what if. So it's the day after the camp was attacked, and when Izuku woke up the next morning, he saw in his sleep Mei sitting next to his bed. And when he wakes her up, she tells him about everything that happened since the camp. So Yue got under fire again, since they were already on thin ice, because of what happened during the school year. And she told him everyone that got injured during the attack. And when she's done talking, she then shows him where his tech and tools were. And they were on the other side of the room in a pile, with most of his tech being either broken or bent. Then later that day, around noon, Class 1A walked into Izuku's room, and Kirishima tells Izuku he has a plan to save Bakugo, since they have a way to trace where the villains are, and he asks if Izuku could help him. But when he said this, most of Class 1A tried to talk him out of it, since so many of their classmates have died already, so they don't want him to try, but they weren't able to change his decision. And before he leaves, he tells Izuku that he will leave tomorrow night, and shortly after Kirishima leaves, the rest of Class 1A leaves to go home. And when they're gone, Izuku calls Mei and he asks her to come to his hospital room, and her to bring her tools. So an hour after Izuku calls Mai, she walks into his room, and she asks why Izuku asked her to bring her tools, since he didn't actually explain anything. And the excuse Izuku gives is that he needs to get stronger when Shinso and Bakugo get rescued, so this never happens again. And Mei, not knowing about what will happen the next night, decides to help him. And by the end of the 2 days, Izuku and Mei were able to repair all of Izuku's gadgets, and Izuku and Mei were able to make upgrades to Izuku's shield and anti-gravity button, so the shield is more dense and durable so it can take more attacks. And the anti-gravity button got compressed into flat plates, and they put them on the palm of Izuku's gloves, and they now can be activated by Izuku's glasses. And when they hit something while activated, it can make an object that it touched weightless for around 2 minutes. But most importantly, they upgraded Izuku's glasses, so now Izuku could use his mind to activate his gadgets, since on the side of his glasses it emits waves of energy, and when Izuku sings a certain word or phrase, it would activate an item as if he actually said it out loud. And he connected it to most of his tech, so his staff, boots, and his gloves. And an hour before the plan, Mei goes home and Izuku is told to go to the main death to get released. And when Izuku gets to the meeting place, the people that were there were Momo, Todoroki, and Kirishima. And after a bit of talking, they begin to follow the tracer Momo put on Nomu during the attack at the camp. And after half an hour, the group makes it to what seems like a normal building. But when they look inside from a window, they see that this place is where the Nomus are created. But before they could do anything, they saw Mount Lady grow taller than the building. Then she kicked the building, destroying it entirely. So seeing as the pros are already there, they decide to just leave. But before they could leave, an explosion hit the area around the building. So now only a wall of the building was intact, and that wall was able to hide the group of students. So Izuku, wanting to know what was happening, activated his zoom in feature in his night vision, and what he saw was the League of Villains fighting Bakugo, Shinso, and Tokoyami. And in the crowd of villains, there seemed to be another person in a black suit wearing a mask, but just seeing him, Izuku became scared. And before All For One could notice Izuku, All Might comes from above, and he launches himself at All For One, and when the two collide, they both seem to have equal strengths. Then the two begin to fight, but from what Izuku could see, he could tell that All Might was holding back, and Izuku believed that it's because he doesn't want to hurt the Suri in the crossfire. So Izuku, after a couple minutes, comes up with a plan, which was Todoroki would use his ice to break the wall, and Kirishima would hold on to Izuku, and Izuku would have his hands on his chest and Kirishima's shoulder, and Kirishima would hold on to Izuku, and he made them weightless. And with them being weightless for 2 minutes, Izuku knew he had to go fast, so they were on the side of a wall, and when the wall broke and they became weightless, Izuku jumped off the building and activated shoes, launching them through the hole in the wall. And Izuku flew to Shinso, who was surrounded by Magna and Toga. And Izuku pulled out his staff and extended it to 10 feet long, and he flew past Shinso. And right before Izuku got too far, Shinso grabbed onto the staff, and he began to fly with the two, and he eventually was able to grab onto Kirishima's hands. And when Shinso had secured, there were now only a minute and a half left of the gravity. And then Izuku shrunk his staff back to a pocket size, and he used his glove to propel themselves faster. And when they were high enough, Kirishima shouted for Bakugo to grab his hand, and hearing Kirishima, Bakugo launches one giant explosion at the ground, launching himself directly at the Suri. And when the villains see this, they stop attacking and they get distracted. But when Magnus sees this, he launches Toga at them using his quirk, but she gets stopped by Mount Lady, and when Bakugo got to the group, he originally grabbed onto Izuku's arm, but the second he did this, Izuku told him they only have a minute before they fall, so Bakugo tells Izuku to grab onto him, which he does, and Bakugo uses his quirk to launch them even faster, and by the end of the minute, they were at the end of the block, and they crashed onto a building. And while they were being launched, Todoroki and Momo grabbed onto Tokoyami using their quirks to defend themselves, and they ran away. And when the group of students get to the city, they watched a fight between All Might and All For One. And when the fight was over, the League besides All For One were taken to safety. This includes Muscular, so he's still with the League. So we skip a couple of days and it's a week before the school year begins. And that morning, Eraser calls all of Class 1A to the living room of the dorm, and he announces that UA will now be stricter than it was before. So there will be security guards surrounding the school, and there will be a curfew of 7 p.m. and if they catch a student, they will be punished. And he called out Izuku, Todoroki, Momo, and Kirishima, and he said that if All Might didn't distract the press with his retirement, he would have had no choice but to expel them, and everyone else in the class, since they knew about what they were planning. Then he tells them to follow him into the gym for their first class, and when they get there, they are told that they will come up with the ultimate move for the upcoming provisional license exams. And when he's done explaining the test and their ultimate moves, everyone gets sent to a place to train, and he leaves Izuku for last. And when he gets to Izuku, he tells him to follow him, eventually leading him to the development studio. And when he opens the door, he sees Mei and Power Loader working on gadgets. Then Aizawa tells Izuku, since he doesn't have a quirk, he can't train to get an ultimate move, so instead he will have 6 days to create gadgets for the exams, and how he will have permission to stay and work all day and night because it requires more time. So Izuku for the first day, with the help of Power Loader and Mei, were able to upgrade Izuku's hero costume, but just in case something messes up with the Mind Reader, he still has a mic for voice activation. And on the second day, students began to go to the development studio to upgrade their costumes. But the two that caught Izuku's eyes were Ayama and Kendo because of their quirks, so he asked if he could test on them after they're done training, which they both agreed to. And what he looked at was how Kendo was able to increase the size of her hands, and how Ayama creates a dense laser. And by the end of the 6th day, Izuku created 2 gadgets based off their quirks. So Izuku's first gadget was a flashlight-looking object that shoots laser beams, that he named the Light Cannon, and it had 5 stages that can be changed by a dial on the side, with the weakest setting being the force of a powerful punch, and the highest setting being able to create giant holes in cement walls. And it's powered by the sun because on the back of the gadget there are solar panels that power it, and it's activated by a button on the side next to the dial. The amount of electricity used is correlated to the stage the gadget is using, and the second gadgets are small discs that have the ability to space atoms, because when researching Kendo's hands, he realized that her quirk changes the space of atoms, creating her big hands, so it can either increase or decrease the size of an object for about a couple of minutes, but the maximum size the gadgets can affect is around the size of an average person, so around 10 feet by 10 feet, so it either makes you that many centimeters or that many yards. And he has 3 of that he keeps in his belt, and they are activated when Izuku hits the button on the back, and he has 2 seconds to throw it, and whatever it hits will be affected. So the final day before the actual exams, Izuku spent the time to master using his items, so now we skip to the next day when Class 1A gets to where their exams are taking place, and they meet the same people as they do in the canon, so they know about Inasa and Miss Joke, and after a bit of time they change into their hero costumes and they walk into the exam room with everyone else. And when the main examiner believes that everyone is there, the exams begin by him explaining the rules of the first phase, which only the first 100 examinees to finish will pass. And when he's done explaining the rules, he passes out 3 targets and balls to each student. And when they all place them, the walls of the room unfold, and they find themselves in a large arena. Then they were given a couple minutes to split up, and most of Class 1A stuck together. But Bakugo, Kirishima, and Kaminari leave, and going by himself, Todoroki leaves as well. And after a couple of minutes, the exams begin. And the moment it started, every school in the exam began to attack Class 1A. But even with all the schools attacking, Class 1A was able to hold their own, with them using their ultimate move to protect their targets and their classmates. And Izuku was able to use his staff and shield to block all the attacks aimed at him. And most of the attacks were aimed at Izuku since they all saw the sports festival and they knew that Izuku is quirkless. But when Yo notices that they can't beat them with Class 1A together, he uses his quirk to break the ground under Class 1A, creating tremors and splitting up Class 1A. And when Izuku was able to get out of the debris, his gear was still intact, but he lost all of his balls. And saying that he is alone, he knew he had to find someone he knew, or the other classes would gang up on him. But after a couple of minutes while he was distracted, he gets attacked, and he gets one of his targets hit, making it so he only has 2 left. And when you look to see who hit his targets, it was a blonde woman from Shiketsu. The two then attack each other, was Izuku using his gear to his advantage, but after he pulls out a sound bomb from his belt, he couldn't find Kami. But after a couple minutes, she appears behind him, and she pushes him to the ground. But before she could do anything, Izuku acts his shoes, and he launches himself into the air. But the moment he gets 10 feet into the air, he makes himself noticeable to everyone around him, which was a whole class of people. And when they notice him, they charge at him, and they throw balls at him. So after a couple minutes of blocking himself with his shield and staff, Ochako appears on a rock nearby, but she slips off the rock she was standing on. And before she hits the ground, Izuku hits himself with his anti-gravity, and he flies over and he catches her. Then he flies away as fast as he could, and after a couple minutes the two were able to escape. And when they were hidden, Izuku uses his heat vision to see if there was anyone nearby. But while he was looking, Ochako pulled out a red ball, and she was about to hit one of Izuku's targets. But right before she hit it, Izuku extended his pole, pushing her hand away. Then he said that if she really was Ochako, she would have just floated away, since she's been practicing on that specifically. So he said she must be a fake. And when he says this, Ochako's face starts to melt. And when she stopped melting, she revealed her true face, revealing it to be Kami again. But before anything could happen, the real Ochako, Sarah, and Shinso appear. And when she sees them, she retreats. And after confirming that the three were real, the four come up with a plan to get the targets that they need. And after 15 minutes, they put their plan into action, which was Izuku and Shinso would use themselves as bait and was running around a group of people. And when the group of people were close enough together, Ochako threw weightless rocks with Sarah's tape attached to them. And when they were past the group of people, she gave them weight again. And the way Izuku and Shinso were able to escape was by using a shrinking disc on themselves, making them small enough to squeeze through the tape. And when the time limit was over, they grew to full size. And all four of them got the targets they needed, making it so Izuku, Sarah, Ochako, and Shinso passed the first phase of the exam, and when they get to where the next phase takes place, they come across Kirishima, Bakugo, and Kaminari, who just passed as well. But sadly, since they were not able to group up since Ayama was alone, since Ida is dead, Mina, Tokoyami, Ayama, Koda, Sato, Ojiro, and Toru weren't able to pass, and now they get replaced by other examinees that have no name. So now they go to the stand to watch what comes next, and when the 100 that pass make it to the room, they see on the monitors in the room, the arena start to blow up, and they are told that people were caught in the attack by a villain, and that their job for this phase is to save as many people as possible, and it will end when the last civilian is saved. Then the room they are standing in starts to unfold, and the minute it completely opens up, the exam begins. And when it begins, the remaining students of Class 1A run in a group to find victims, and eventually they come across a kid with blood coming from their head. And Izuku got some points taken off since when he saw the kid, he analyzed how injured he was, and he blurted out "this looks bad," instead of actually comforting the victim. And when the kid hears this, he yells at Izuku, and saying what he did wrong, Izuku puts on a giant smile and he said that it will all be okay. And when he said this, he was given the okay to bring the victim to safety. Izuku then flew to the first aid station while everyone else went to go look for other victims. And after a couple minutes, Izuku was able to secure the kid at the first aid station. But before Izuku could go back to look for more victims, alarms around the arena start to ring. Then on the speakers, the main examiner says that the villain that attacked the city earlier has come back for round 2. So now it's their job to stop the villain and rescue the civilians. And when the examiner is done speaking, someone breaks through a wall of the arena. And when the dust settles, Izuku sees Gang Orca and his sidekicks. And seeing them, Izuku runs straight at the group of villains, with Yo running alongside him. And when they get around a couple feet away from the group, Yo tells Izuku to get off the ground. And when Izuku hears this, he activates his boots and he flies straight up, around 40 feet up. And when Izuku was off the ground, Yo used his quirk to create tremors under the group of villains. But Gang Orca was able to counterattack by using his hypersonic waves straight at Yo, paralyzing it. And seeing this, Izuku flies straight at Yo. And seeing this, Gang Orca launches another sonic wave. But Izuku, before it hit him, got out a sound bomb, and he pulled the pin. And when the two waves collided, they both sort of cancel each other out, since Izuku's sound bomb is a little weaker than Gang Orca. So what Izuku hears is just a loud noise in his ears. It isn't enough to hurt him really, but his ears are still ringing. But knowing that it won't last long, Izuku got out his light cannon, and he shot it at Orca's shoulder at the third stage. And when it hit him, he stopped using his sonar for a bit, since he was caught off guard. And he used that free time to pick up Yo and fly away to the first aid station. And when he looked back after securing Yo, he saw Todoroki and Inasa arguing with each other while fighting Orca, with their quirks canceling each other out, making it so it's only damaging the area around them. And when Izuku got back, he shouted, "What the hell are you doing?" Then he charges straight at Orca's goons, and with all of his gadgets he was able to handle them, but after taking down the 4th henchman, Orca uses another sonar wave at Izuku, and again, Izuku used another sound bomb, but this time one of the sidekicks shot Izuku with a cement gun, making cement attached to his shoulder. But seeing this, Todoroki and Nasa finally get together, and they start to work together, and they trap Gang Orca in a spiral of flames, but this does not completely beat him, and he was able to get a water ball from his pocket, and he dumped it on his head, hydrating himself. And seeing this, Izuku got out his light cannon, and he shoots the cement on his shoulder, breaking it. Then he launches himself at Orca, and he begins to attack Orca with his staff and shield, but after a couple of minutes, Orca was able to grab onto Izuku's staff, and he slammed him to the ground, and he said that he's impressed on how much Izuku has improved, but he's still not the best he could be. And after he said this, the speakers turn on in the arena, and the main examiner says that the last civilian has been saved. So now the exams are finally over, and that's where I'm going to leave the What If. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time on Something Z.